the hard-boiled subgenre of crime fiction. Your first image was probably the tough, masculine detective pitting his principles against the evils of the urban city. You'd probably also have imagined violence, guns, and seductive, traitorous women. These are definitely some of its features, and they didn't develop in a vacuum. Kim Wilkins wrote in 2005, "Genres are not static, ahistorical categories. Rather, they are processes, formed and reformed by the interactions of authors, readers, and institutions." Messent explains that hard-boiled crime developed as a result of the zeitgeist of the Great Depression and the Prohibition in America, and grew from a dissatisfaction held regarding the optimistic, innocent illusionism of Golden Age crime fiction. Hard-boiled crime fictions are set in the urban streets of America where the explicit nature of crime is unhidden. The detective is a man of working-class background, combining rationality with street smarts and violence to work alongside policemen. He is also continually tempted by the sex and crimes of the city. Of the two texts we will now consider, one heavily influenced the creation of these conventions and the other innovatively revised them. Peter Messent observes that morality is one of Chandler's primary discussions, where he sought to present the overbearing systematic injustice of America at the time through 4 key aspects within the novel. These are law, sexuality, the protagonist, and the narrative structure setting in form within the novel. We will firstly consider law and morality. In The Big Sleep, Messent observes that Chandler's depiction of the nature of law in Los Angeles is one where corruption reigns and the moral hero Marlowe is powerless to stop it. The corrupt law, in his words, is available only to those with the financial means to access it. In the context of the squalor heralded by the Depression and industrialization, Chandler explores this corruption of law as caused by personal greed, most obvious in the Sternwood and Mars families' survival beyond the law. Messent further observes that the legal system is illustrated as predatory and decaying through the emphatic use of animal imagery and the overwhelming criminality in both the public and police populations. Crime thereby is expressly normal, and there is nothing unusual about hearing gunshots in the neighboring apartment. The solution to this desolately immoral world? There is none. Messent explains how Marlowe is the knight of the story, the epitome of moral worth, integrity, and chivalric standard in a world that refuses them. Yet even he fails at the end, both committing murder and covering another up, simply maintaining the status quo. In The Monkey's Mask, moving from the Depression to the rise of postmodernity and neoliberalism, Porter represents crime in a more individualistic light than in Chandler's criticism of capitalist society. Anxiety is now focused on motivations behind crime, as morality is questioned at the subjective level of the mind and desire on top of their behavioral manifestations. Binary notions of morality versus immorality are rejected through complications such as Diana's loyalty to Nick as the cause of her deception. The revulsion towards crime is transferred onto immorality through parallels within the text, such as when Diana attempts to erotically asphyxiate Jill after Mickey was found strangled to death. This revulsion then overpowers the reader as nearly all characters are immoral. It is then important to realize Jill's dual role as knight and damsel in distress. Despite being the detective, her relationship with immorality, as Lucas points out, is one of struggling to overcome rather than eventually failing to resist it. This reversal is a revisionist commentary on the dominance of immorality within oneself, not only as a primarily external or systematic threat. Secondly, sex and morality. In The Big Sleep, Marlowe's relationships with binary genders and sexuality amongst them is inelastic and revealing. His attitude towards women is easily misogynistic, characterizing them as vampiric and animalistic, having sharp bones, white skin, and teeth like glittering knives. They are also willful agents of temptation. He declares that it's so hard for women to realize that their bodies are not irresistible. Chandler writes of Carmen as the centerpiece of sexual compulsion and drug use, and Vivian as that of gambling. These women are bait that lure decent men to immorality. They are the dangerous, seductive femme fatales. What, then, is his attitude towards men? Marlowe and Chandler seem to draw a distinction between the admirable masculine man and the despicable feminine man, the latter of which is associated with homosexuality. Homosexuality is a target for violence that is in itself antithetical to moral security, shown in Marlowe's hostile descriptions such as fag party. Masculinity, however, encourages the only amicable behavior seen in tough, distant Marlowe, what Messent terms homosociality. This refers to his deep fraternal respect for idols such as Reagan and General Sternwood, a respect that ironically leads him to his moral downfall. Chandler hence declares that escape from crime and immorality is ultimately impossible, even if one avoids the trap set by women and sides with honorable men. In The Monkey's Mask, the gender binary and its sexual conventions are almost completely turned around through a variety of complications. The most obvious is that the detective is female. She is also a lesbian, and so assumptions about rationality, competence, sexual roles, and objectification are removed from the gender binary. Another is the allocation of both Nick and Diana to the role of femme fatale. Traditionally feminine, this shift in role is not presented as natural. It alarms Jill, the reader's lens. Porter here confronts our understanding of seduction and its gendered vessel. This disorientation strongly encourages the reader to resolve that it is not the physical vessel, but sexual exploitation and violence that is the true threat. Here, Porter uses the metaphorical concept of masked identities to encourage fear of the taboo behind the mask. Thirdly, the protagonist and morality. In The Big Sleep, Marlowe is the disciplined, righteous knight, conventional in hardboiled crime, and protects his personal principles as though an infallible rationality. At the novel's conclusion, complicating the binary notion of morality is Marlowe's decision to forsake the outer worldly justice in favor of a personal moral debt to a dying man. Even here, it is Marlowe's explicit binary understanding of morality that allows the reader to recognize that immorality is being exercised. In The Monkey's Mask, Jill, despite being a character who maintains the genre conventions of being independent, candid, and physically powerful, is not enabled by these traits to project a strict, clear litmus test of morality. Her rationality is compromised throughout the verse novel by moral motivations, for example, love and loyalty, made immoral in context. She is also trapped in the liminal space between moral victim, as Diana's mistress, and moral invigilator, as the private eye, and even at the novel's conclusion has not resolved this dilemma. Porter therefore rejects the previously binary understanding of morality to present the constitution of morality as ambiguous in itself, yet reinforcing the idea that the detective protagonist does not have the answer to this dilemma. Finally, narrative structure, setting, and form. Regarding the narrative structure of The Big Sleep, Mesant identifies that the numerous crimes, deaths, willful acts of violence, and the systematic relation of crimes force the impression of an oppressive, inescapable socio-political system of immorality upon the reader. Further, Chandler's dark, negative descriptions of the city streets the novel is set in reflects the seedy urban squalor Mesant identifies as a result of growing urbanization and organization of crime during the Depression and Prohibition. Concerning the narrative structure of The Monkey's Mask, Porter's decision to exclude a conclusive resolution to both the multiple crimes and Jill's moral dilemma is the strongest appeal to morality's ambivalence. Its setting in 1994 Australia is unmistakable, and the implied global and temporal universality reveals the perpetuity of perversion. Further, Lucas observes that Porter's innovative form of verse fragments the narration into an emotive, thematic kaleidoscope of Jill's personal thoughts, which further clouds the binary conception. In these ways, Mesant aids the exploration of immorality in these two hard-boiled crime fiction texts. Thank you for listening.